Hello there, I'm Melody Jackson.
And I'm John King.
All right, John, why don't you tell them what we're up to today?
Well, Melody, you and I have been having a series of conversations over the last few weeks. You're a gal who is in show business and lives in California, and I used to be in show business, and I live in Mexico. And we both had an interest in the question of what is it to live life artfully. And so, as I recall, you thought, you know what? I think it's about the transitions we go through. And
Yes.
the more you talked about it and began to uh, sort of lay it out for me, I became convinced that I think you're right. So we kind of are colluding to have a
I
little
like that
conversation.
we're colluding on this issue.
It is, and just have a little conversation exploring, the impact of transitions in our life and how the going through gets us where we're going.
It's so
So,
great. Yeah, when I joined one of your other seminar podcast kinds of things, I guess you would call it a podcast. It could be. Actually, we're not recording. But when I joined that, I was so inspired by just how you were talking about this idea of living life artfully. And that is something, like, I really don't consider myself kind of an artful person. I tend to be very practical. I do consider myself creative, but not as much attuned to the aesthetic as I would like to be. So I was really inspired by what you were talking about in that conversation. And then, as you said, at some point, then when you and I were having separate conversations, we just kind of led to this whole idea of transitions. And so, yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
no
it's good.
kidding. When you talk about living life artfully and kind of being focused on the aesthetic, the thing that I think is that we're all aesthetic without knowing it. I mean, some of us are very conscious of it. People who make their life in art,
Well, part of it
but
is you have that dance background, and I know that you're always talking about fashion and different things like that. So I think you're really attuned to that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, it's a crazy thing with me, Melody. When I was in college, I wasn't there very long, but while I was there, my major was in philosophy and it was in aesthetics.
Oh, okay.
It's just kind of like beauty is something that I have an interest in, which, lucky me, I get to talk to you.
Well, I'm thinking what a good compliment. It's like you have that aesthetic sense, and I have a very practical sense,
Mhm.
which brings about then my question is always then how can I actually bring this about in my life? Like, how do I make it real? In taking it from this idea, how do I make it real in my life? And that can actually lead to all kinds of things, because it's been the question of how I make what I want to have happen in my life. How do I make that real? And that's really where, for me, the whole idea of transitions came up. And I think that's how it kind of emerged out of something we were talking about at the time, which could have been anything, but suddenly it emerged like these critical transitions are where the way you've been living your life, where something happens and you're forced to make a change. And so coming back to this idea of
Yeah,
living life artfully and sort of changing something in my environment, which is not just art, but it's like, what is it to move through
yeah,
life with grace and
yeah. I,
something beyond the.
I don't know if I'm kind of, it's interesting what you're bringing up because now I'm sitting here trying to question whether the critical transitions, uh, there is the event called a critical transition. Sometimes life just hands it to you, sometimes you actually cause it, but if that's what you're going through as you're growing and going and everything else like that. And then there is your relationship to the critical transition, which I say is that's the part about living life artfully. So there's something
Yes.
that may be a lot of work. The critical transition going through, I think in a case of maybe a marriage, or going into a relationship, or the birth of a child. You are who you are as a parent, and it's all kind of a theory. And then there comes that day when the child is birthed. You have the anticipation and everything of the child is birthed. And life is never the same after that. You have transition through it. And a lot of that transition was physical and difficult and trying. However, there's the kind of created attitude towards it. And the created attitude towards it could be something like it was a drag, or it could be something about that was really a beautiful experience. And aesthetics is concerned with our relationship to beauty, and that however we say it is, beautiful or ugly, we're right. And so it really has a lot to do with an approach to life. I mean, it's an indicative of how, so we have the things like people are born, people pass away, people go into relationships, people have divorces, and there are those who seem to have a way of going through it gracefully, going through it with a kind of a sense of aesthetic, and there are people who go through it with, I don't know, a way of...
Well, survival. It's like, how can I get through this? Like, just the reactionary survival kind of mechanisms. And I think that's one of the places, that is the place where most of our pain and suffering lives, is when we are reacting and trying to get through whatever kind of transition just showed up. And now we've got to get through it. I mean, like even with COVID right now, this is a global transition.
It is.
And cultural, and we see people, I mean, myself, I've felt a lot of peace. So it's like, but I was ready for some kind of upheaval, and people close to me haven't been sick, and I haven't lost someone, so I have a different relationship than some people to it just because of that. But just the overall situation where things have slowed down all over, it's like just on a spiritual level, on an internal level, it's a time that I've been able to rethink. It's been a different kind of transition for me. But yeah, it's a global transition. And then there's also a question, if we're kind of exploring, let's say we're exploring what is a transition, and maybe a couple different types of transitions. Something that's been on my mind for years now is, like, there have been a particular kind of transformation that I've wanted for myself. Like there's some kind of, I've done a lot of transformation work, but there's this other place that I want to, quote, get to, which I know we really shouldn't be saying get to, but it's like, that's how it lives for me. It's like a place I want to get to that I am being from. I've had that in mind. And I've asked the question, how can I get there without having this outside force come in and propel me to it? Like, how could I get there without having to have some really bad thing happen? And I've been trying to get there without that. But then some things just kind of showed up in my life that keep like giving me a goose to go that way. Like, hello, so it hasn't been just sort of this place to transition from my thinking and making the decision to get there. It's like this, so the question is, can we have the transformation that's available in a transition? Can we actually transition and how fast can it happen if we want to get to a different place without something big and bad happening? Or is it necessary to go through the fire to get to the other side? So there's a lot in that, I know, but it's like...
Oh, that's a phenomenal kind of framing of the question. What I'm hearing in the background, a couple of things. There was a guy named Warren Bennis who was an expert on leadership and wrote about 25 books on leadership. And one of the famous things that he said was that leaders are forged in the fire.
There you go.
Which is pointing right at where you're looking like, oh, it's got to be hard.
Right, that's what they say, but but go ahead, John.
That's the question. And it brings up for me the question of what is the relationship as an individual to resisting the transition we're going through, given that there is nothing constant except change, as they say, to resisting the transition. And you started with this interesting conversation about COVID, which is a global transition that clearly we can all see we're going through. And you look at where the resistance is and at what level. For example, the resisting of wearing a mask. And the amount of conversation and upset that is organized around that mask and the story of what the mask represents, which is the imposition of some kind of suppressive something on me. It's holding me back. It's an example of a place where my freedom is being chipped away at, things like that. So
yeah, and I just want to point out, it's like, for me, I'm not saying right or wrong or whatever. It's just, we're really just noticing this, that all of this lives, this resistance. It's not just saying, I don't want to wear a mask. Like when I wear it, it's like, I feel like I can't breathe and that kind of thing. So we're really not just talking about the simple question of, do you want to wear a mask or not? We're talking about the story behind it, which brings about this resistance.
That's exactly right.
Deep resistance.
So is it the transition or is it the story about the transition?
Yes, that's great.
Where it gets, it's like, what do we make the transition mean? Do we make the transition mean that it is something that is undermining to my life expression, my self-expression in life? Or is it something that I see that I can, the image that I like in terms of what I was thinking about when you were talking about transitions is, how do we find a way to tuck into the curl of the wave and surf with it?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
As a sense, kind of like when I was growing up, they would say things like, go with the flow.
Yeah. Hey, I think that's still out there. Go with the flow.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at what a generalized kind of division of conversation around just COVID. And what I see is on one side, all bad, wrong, evil, suppressive, survival. And on the other side, it's kind of like, oh no, this is taking us to an interesting place.
Right.
Don't know what it is, but it seems to be like, how could we, I think the artful question is kind of, how can we be related to an international pandemic as a voyage of discovery, for growth and discovery?
Right. Instead of just having the fear behind it, because people can get caught up in the fear of COVID and all the, and not to say you shouldn't have any fear about it or concern about it, but there's this whole other level that's going on. But I want to go back to one thing that you were pointing to earlier about the story of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely relate some of the transformation that I've been desiring over the past few years has to do with around my work. Like I've really have reached a level of mastery in the kind of work that I've been doing for a long time in the film industry. And I want to continue to do that, but there's something new that I want to have open up. And I know that one of the reasons that it's been what I would consider slow in revealing itself is because of my resistance, and that resistance, just like you said, is my story about it. My story about my business. And there's just like, I've had my business for over 20 years, well over 20 years. We won't say how many years over 20, but well over 20. And
you mean since you were, what, maybe 9,
right.
10?
Exactly. Maybe even younger, John.
Yeah, could be.
But something like that. But I just see that one of the reasons that it's really been taking longer than I think it, quote, should, is that I've had so much conversation in my head about it, which we know is resistance. If there's conversations, concerns,
let me just
judgments.
Stop you for a second. The it that you're talking about is the kind of the growth or the scaling of your business. Is that what you're saying?
It's actually
about why it has been taking so long.
Oh, right. Why for me to find the new area that I want to express my passion in. So I have my current business and I want to continue to do that. But now it's like I have that level of mastery there. So I want to have something else that expresses a new level of passion. And I know I'm just so present to, and I just see so clearly that my story about how it should or shouldn't be related to the business that I've had for so long, that I've made my living for so long and met so many people, my story about how it should or shouldn't be has been what has kept me from really freeing myself up, opening my heart, allowing my heart to see what can be, what is there for me to do next because of my judgments and my story.
Well, I think that's really fruitful. And what I'd like to say is, rather than having it be generalized I got it. It's inside of a context called Melody Story.
Yes.
About the business.
Yeah.
The question is, what are the elements of that story? And you were starting to go, well, your attitudes and your points of view and so on like that. But like specifically, what is it in your story that you see that if you let that go or changed it, rewrote the story, so to speak, it would free you up to transition to whatever is next for you?
Well, I can tell you a couple of them are things like, why did I quit doing the marketing like I used to do? Why am I not as passionate about it now as I was when I started 20 plus years ago? And is
the answer to why useful?
Well, of course, these are questions that are not useful.
That's the whole thing. I had a teacher once who said an amazing thing to me. Actually stopped my life like right on a dime when he said, I was a why guy. And he said, first of all, he asked me if I thought that the answer to why was useful, and I did, of course.
Right. It's like, well, then I'll know.
and he said, other than basically in science, he said, why is a question that is designed to drive you crazy?
And it keeps you in the same place because it keeps me. Go ahead.
I can get it as something like, Simon Sinek has had this wonderful kind of series of conversations that are based on Nietzsche's famous comment that if you get to the answer to why, then you won't have to worry about the how, essentially. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, I can't, when I look in the area of the aesthetic, I don't really see any why about it. It's kind of because it is.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
I do.
In the area of, let's say, virtue, or in the area of excellence, or in the area of how come you would do something, just the mere fact of its existence justifies its existence, if you can kind of track that sort of tautology.
I think, John, it's so perfect. You're talking about it in the realm of the aesthetic, and I'd like to bring it back to something very practical. So if we come back to my question of why am I not passionate about this like I used to be, and why this, it's like 100 different why questions. Like, why did I just kind of stop my marketing? If I come back to that, if I sit there and try to come up with my answers, and actually I did sit there for a long time and I came up with a bunch of answers, and guess what? It helped nothing.
Yeah, I have a feeling that you didn't come up with any answers. I think you came up with reasons. There's a big difference.
Well, if you want to say it that way, I mean, I was thinking of them.
Here's why I'm saying it that way. Because there's a difference between reasons and cause. And the question that you're trying to ask with why is what's the cause of this? But what you came up with were the reasons why you didn't.
Well, that's true. I would agree. But even the cause, I think, can be a question that'll take you to, is really not going to take you someplace helpful. I mean, it might in some cases, but for me, I explored this thing inside out and tried to see what was going on inside that led me to that. What are the reasons? What are the causes? Oh, this happened and that caused me to feel this way. None of that helped me get anywhere. And really it comes back to what has finally made the difference is just because. I'm just...
very good. Very, very good.
It's like there is no answer after that. And I think this kind of resistance, because that's what I'm really distinguishing here, it was all that other stuff was resistance to the transformation I actually wanted to bring about.
Yeah,
that's the resistance.
Good. And you said something interesting a little earlier. You said it was fear. You spoke to fear, and you talked about fear, and we tied it to fear of COVID. I think that any word that follows the word fear is actually an undermine to understanding.
Say more.
If we could just get that it's about fear.
Say a little bit more.
And well, it's one thing for me to say, well, I have a fear in the matter of COVID, rather than me actually accepting that what's part of me is I live in a condition of fear and dealing with that. See, what's stopping you in the transition? The transition could be happening in your personal life. It could be happening in your health. It could be happening in the area, in this case, of your passion. It could be happening in the area of your growth and development. It could be happening in the area of your expression of contribution and service. All of these areas, and you can apply fear of contribution or fear of the passion or the fear of the consequences of whatever. But in fact, it all nets out to, all of that is something that I call an assigned cause. It's something outside of me. Fear of the outside of me COVID, fear of the outside of me growth and development, fear of the outside of me right now passion. So like that. And it all nets out to, well, it's fear. Now, if I was looking inside subjectively, if I was looking inside aesthetically, but really subjectively, and I was looking into fear and owning it, not as a thing to a state of becoming to get somewhere someday maybe and improve something,
It's
but
like,
literally as this is my state of being.
well, it's like allowing the fear to be there, but not having it drive you.
Yeah, well, I don't even know about the but right now. I mean, that seems to me like that's a further step. How about just allowing the fear?
Okay, yeah, we got to be there first before we can
Yeah,
make some other choice.
because what we're trying to access is we're trying to access a way of being rather than a way of becoming. See, transitioning and being a transitioner, if there's such a thing, is a way of being in life. And you'll notice some people, you see it in the arts all the time. When I was growing up, there was and I know you know of them, a remarkable rock and roll group called the Beatles. And nobody liked them. But every time they went away, and they went away about once a year, they came back and they were completely something else. And they went through, I don't know how many different transitions. Same thing happened with Madonna when she was starting her career, and she just kept, it was kind of like molting into whatever was the next expression, the next expression, the next expression. There was nothing that was set. And there was nothing, we're seeing Lady Gaga is doing this. Now, she's actually, I like this, I'm going to say molting.
Yeah, I like that.
You know, every time you see her, it's like she shed her cocoon that was her most recent expression. And it just seems like it's the next place for her to find herself. And surely there is some kind of fear that wants to hold on to the previous incarnation because it was successful.
Yes.
And she's got a career that is highly organized around being successful, you know, you might say marketing, branding, expressing herself as a certain kind of expression in the world. And yet she goes away and comes back and she's molted into this, who is this? An unrecognizable Lady Gaga.
Well, there's something that's striking me. I really hadn't thought about it with artists, but to remain interesting, particularly people like Madonna and others, I always thought Madonna was doing it just to change it up and be interesting. That may be part of it, but I like this idea of it's actually part of their artistic expression to continually express themselves in a different way. And the other thing that occurred to me in what you were saying is that at some point it strikes me that for people like them, they could actually get comfortable with that kind of transition. So there are certain transitions that people can be comfortable with. It's like their way of life, like that's their thing, and it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of fear for them because they're used to it. Maybe their fear is something else, which would be kind of the opposite. So I think when we're looking at like what are my fears around some kind of transition, or really it's more like not just what not just what are my fears, but one way to kind of get at this is to look at what do I want that's different from what I have right now that will require some kind of transition that I'm afraid to make. Because that's really where it shows up. It's like
that's really interesting. I was actually listening to a very interesting guy named Jordan B. Peterson today. He's a psychologist. He teaches at University of Chicago, writes books. And he literally was talking about exactly that, Melody. He was saying that I'm going to say the delta, the difference between where you want to be and where you are now is that the expression of that is fear.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought, wow, you bingo, right on the conversation. So
well, and even if we can go back to COVID, it's I think this actually leads to another really important point. So let's just say that we have some people listening to this show and there are people who are just really taken by the fear about COVID. I mean, I would love to, be able to provide some relief. But what I'm thinking about, now let me recall my thought, is that, oh my gosh, I totally forgot what I was going to say. You go on and talk and I'll come back to it. Right.
Don't worry about it at all. It just, it's you're swimming in the pool of this particular conversation, and clearly, you want to be inclusive about it, and in a sense, you just said, everybody who wants to jump into the pool, come in. I want to give you a little bit of relief.
That's right. Yeah.
In the area of COVID, and and your thought about, because you could either be transitioning gracefully through the COVID thing.
Okay, now I remember.
Okay, good. Unconsciously or consciously, or in fear. Okay, so you're back.
Right. So if you have a fear of COVID, and I mean not just the regular fear where you should, have some concern about it because you could get sick, but let's say this overwhelming fear. The question is, what is it that you want? What is it that you want? Okay, now what does someone want? If they have a fear of COVID and that fear is taking them over, then there is that delta. There's something that they want. Otherwise, fear would not be there. If there were not a different way you want it to be, you couldn't have the fear. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I don't know. You've triggered something in me, when you got down to the want, or another way of saying that, the Greeks would have said, in a Socratic word, they would have said desire.
Yes, and that's actually better. I like that. That's what I tend to use. So.
Yeah, they kind of looked at it like there was a thing that was called the telos, which is the spirit of human being, the mind, and then the logos, your word and your actions, and then the driver, which is the desire. And when you started saying that, I began looking at, in the area of desire, given the greater condition, the contextual life, planetary kind of context of COVID-19. What is my desire? My desire is health, all people healthy.
Okay.
And my access to that is my spirit, what I'm driving it for, and that would be analogous to my passion, and the tools that I have, which come out of my word, logos.
Well, let's look a little bit more at this desire. So because I have friends who are just very much in this fear state, and it seems like it's bigger than just they're worried that they might get it or someone they know. It might occur like that, but it just seems so much bigger.
Yes.
The fear that they're in. So the thing that strikes me about it, like you're talking about, really you were saying, some of the things you're saying are ways that you might deal with it artfully or gracefully. What I'm thinking about is, so let's say even with what you said about your desire would be for yourself and everyone to be healthy around this and not be affected by it, something like that. If we look at that's what we want, okay, well, we can desire that. But does that alleviate the fear? I don't think so. It doesn't alleviate it just because we want that. And even it's like there's a way in which we have to transform our relationship to the fear first before any of this other stuff can happen. Because if I'm living this way, because I can't go out and make sure everyone's safe. I can do what I can to make sure I'm safe, but I can't make sure the whole world is safe, or even the people that I know and love. I can't make sure they're safe. I can desire that and encourage it, but it still may not impact my fear just because I want that. Not to mention, I can't control it. So then if I'm trying to control it, that's when I might just lose my mind if you don't wear a mask, because I'm trying to control it. The place I think we have to start is by shifting our relationship to fear internally, so that then it's not just that I'm trying to make you wear a mask because of my fear. I can come from a different place. What do you think?
Well, here's what I think. I think that how it nets out is whether you consider fear to be a reality or fear to be a story about a reality. And my particular point of view is fear is a story about reality.
Yes, and mine too.
Here's what I know. I know that whether I like it or not, I'm living inside of a story. I know that in the best of all possible worlds, I'm the writer, producer, director, and star of the story of my own life. And it's happening in real time. But I'm living inside of a story that is I'm kind of making up as I go. But here's the thing. Not only am I living inside of a story, but I'm living inside of a story that is interacting with your story. Interacting with the story of the media.
Now, let me just interject something that someone might object to that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But COVID is real. Like, COVID is actually a virus.
No, there is reality
that's out
about COVID. I'm not arguing that there is something called a virus. I'm not arguing that people get sick. But
what's the difference with the story then?
You yourself said the thing about you have these friends who are living in fear, and the fear is way beyond the actual scientifically kind of laid out reality. The numbers are 0.5% of all the people who contract COVID die.
Right, and a large portion of that is over a certain age, right? So that's the reality of it.
And they're all 70 and over, and not only that, but of all the people who contracted out of the people who test positive, it's like 3%. So 3% of a total population, and 0.5% of that 3% die. Okay, that's a manageable thought, but so what I'm saying is, the story is not that. The story is this huge, and it's fear-based thing, and it's planetary. You and I both have a friend that works with me in Oman, and Oman they just instituted a curfew, and there's feeling a resurgence. I was just talking to my friend Randy in Jordan this morning, and they just instituted a curfew and off the streets because they're having a spike. So it's all of that stuff is going on, and the fear is palpable, and it is impacting the quality of people's lives. And so that's why I'm saying, is it the reality, which is 0.5% or 3% of the population that take your pick, or is it that this is an 8 billion people, something we're never going to get out of, which seems to be the interest of the media to, they're making money off of this story. And if you look at the science and the scientists and the doctors and what they have to say, they're not in agreement.
Right.
The same guy who told you to wear a mask has told you not to wear a mask, has told you to wear a mask, has told you not to wear a mask, has told you that the mask is like vital, has told you that the mask, it makes no difference. The same guy.
Right, exactly.
What is his story?
Right. And I think, and we could definitely go down that line. And I think that's, a perfect example of story just on a more cultural level and what influences the story. If we go back to kind of bringing it back to the personal level, that we get enveloped in this cultural story, and then it feels very personal. So
Yeah.
it feels like it's my truth.
Yes.
And
Well, that was what I was saying. I'm inside of a story that is inside of a greater story.
right. And and again that's a practical thing too, but I'm saying whether it's the story about something big and archetypal like this COVID idea, this COVID event or whatever, pandemic, and the story about it, or we're talking about a very practical day-to-day thing where I want to transition to a different kind of career or job or business or something, some kind of transition that happens all the time. Pandemics don't happen all the time, but it's the same kind of mechanism at work when we are dealing with these everyday transitions that come up for people as well. It doesn't have to be huge and archetypal and involving the whole globe. It can be in our microcosm, and we've still got to deal with.
But how do you separate your story from the meta story of your culture?
Well, I think that if you're looking to, I think that's a great question and also timely. I say,
do you know the poem? I'm sure you do. The poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If."
I may.
If
I'd have
you
to
can
hear a
keep
few
your,
lines.
if you can keep your mind when all about you is going crazy, so to speak, and it ends up on the line. He wrote it to his son, and he said, "If you can do all of this, then you are a man, my son." The ability to actually stay centered when everything around you is cuckoo, because it doesn't matter. Take away COVID, everything is still cuckoo. Just look at the political scene. Take away the political scene, everything is cuckoo. Look at economics. Take away, it's like, I don't care how many things that you take away. You live in California. Take away everything and just give yourself your wildfires. Everything is cuckoo. There's always a meta story.
Well,
And how do you separate yourself from that so that you can actually think?
I think that, it's always about consciousness. It's always about whether you're just at the impact of your individual story that you're living, as I was saying, relating to making a business transition, whether it's just very localized like that, or it's within your family, which is a little bit bigger, or your next level circle, or whatever. Like, no matter how big it gets, it actually starts with that distinction of understanding that you have a story. And to reiterate, fear, it's one thing to have the fear that's an automatic reaction because you see a threat right in front of you. But it's a different thing to have a fear that is multiplying itself. It's like imagine these little fear, I'm just picturing like these little fear viruses in your head. So it's not the COVID itself, but it's like the little fear viruses that are just multiplying because of your thoughts. So again, it's to allow the fear based on what's real, that if you don't want to get it and maybe you have some fear about it and you need to pay attention and deal with that, and then letting it be versus having it multiply. And so the first thing to actually make a transition to living a different way and having a different relationship to it is to understand and to distinguish that fear that's just multiplying on its own because you're allowing yourself to continue to think about the fear and imagine worst case scenarios and that kind of thing. It's just to notice that you are the one who's helping that fear virus just multiply. Separate it out, or really just if you notice it and then you back up and you observe, like, wow, I'm really spinning out of control in my fear on this. Then I step back here and then something else becomes possible. But that first step, no matter whether it's cultural, well, or just very localized and personal, you gotta step back from all that chatter and the little fear viruses or whatever it is that's busy keeping you, distracting you from the business of creating something new. You have to create some distance.
Yeah, I think that that is why you see the phenomenon now. When things get crazy, you begin to see a rising a phenomenon of people doing a lot more meditating, for example.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a perfect example.
People literally closing off and going inside and consulting the real expert in their lives, who is themselves.
And the authentic self, the authentic self is the real expert, not that.
The whole idea is to quiet the chatter, quiet all of that, and then begin to look at what authentically is going to make a difference. One of the things that I think people come up with, and this is kind of at the heart of what you were talking about in terms of what's next for you, is that when people do this, at a transition, they do something that a lot of people call swimming in their own lane. They don't really have a whole lot of interest about what's going on around them in the meta story. They're pretty much, wow, I'm excited about this, and I'm going to go down this pathway and stay in this pathway. And you may have an opinion, assessment, judgment, point of view about it. That's fine. But this is where I'm going and how I'm, and they kind of get focused in and zeroed in on, I think that's a good term, swimming in their own lane. And so the question is, what lane are you going to swim in? And I think that access to that has a lot to do with where people are arriving at, access to a lot of that by involving themselves in some sort of inner work. And, in that process, very commonly is things like therapy or meditation or stuff where they're using each other, since we're social, using each other to do, what does it all mean? And sorting out the story from what's really important to us. I think that's going on a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that I see so much, since we're talking about the COVID experience, is exactly that people being forced to quiet and slow down.
Mm-hmm.
It's really put them, it's like if there is a force that says, go to your room, it's like, we all are gone to our room, and now what is there? And it's like this sort of forced, I would say a vacation, but people may not relate to it that way, but this.
Oh, I think they actually are going to it voluntarily. You yourself are currently in the second day of a transitional process that actually gives you an additional 5 to 6 hours a day just to go inside.
Yes.
Why don't you share a little bit about what that and what you're going through and what you're seeing?
And you're talking about the fast, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So as I was sharing a little bit with you, through this experience, really quieting down, I realized that I, for health purposes, want to go through this 5-day fast. And I took it on. It's a particular kind of fast that you got some little soup packets and various things. And I was both looking forward to it and afraid of it, but I think the kind of fear that I had was a good kind. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm worried. In fact, this ties into the other thing that I'm getting out of it, is my fear the day before was, what if I can't stick with it? What if those kind of fears, and I paid this money for this box of things to help me go through it. What if I just blow it? So there was that kind of thing, but I really would say I didn't indulge it. It just was there, and I just kind of kept putting it aside. So then I began it yesterday, and even as I was preparing some things in the morning, I was preparing some chicken for my dog and the little single serves to put in the freezer. And then I also had some of my own chicken that I was doing the same for separately. And I was so aware that I had to be present in every moment, because I could put some chicken in one little baggie, and then I would maybe get a little bit on my fingers or a little bit with whatever, and I would just be inclined to go on and eat it. And I thought, wait a minute, I've got to be completely present in every second, particularly doing that. Otherwise, I would mess up the fast. So in recognizing that and then keeping that in mind, especially in the area of the temptation, which is when I go into my kitchen, if I get unconscious, I'm going to ruin my fast. I'm just going to grab something and take a drink of something or a bite of something and be out of it. So it's really giving me this opportunity to have my mind master my automatic activity. And then the other thing that was so funny is this morning I got up early and I was, was doing some work or what have you, and I was going to come out to the office to get ready for our call. I opened my office door and out runs my dog. And I thought, oh my gosh, did I leave her here last night? And that has never happened before. I'm about 95% sure I left her in the office the whole night. She seemed not traumatized. She came running out joyfully. But I just thought it was the great irony that I took on this fast. And one of the things that immediately comes up is that I think I left my dog in the office overnight the first time ever. On
the one hand, you're saying in the case of the fast, and you use the word presence, it's something that's bringing me extremely present, and that it's critical if I'm going to succeed at this, that I remain present, because if I drop it out for a second, I'll lick my finger and eat the chicken or whatever. And yet what comes up is, was I present in the case of my dog? How did that happen? So what a great kind of internal exercise. If you get that the fast, obviously you're going to get some sort of physical benefits out of the fast, but the internal benefits, that is the benefits at the level of your growth and development and becoming present, are way, way more, there as a benefit.
Yes.
2 months ago, I underwent some surgery on ancient injuries that I'd had for many, many years. And during the course of kind of the immediate recuperation of it, of the surgery, I was in bed, not moving, and had a whole lot of time to just kind of get myself present. And mainly what I was present to was the real reality in life, because if there's any reality in life, it's pain.
Right.
So
right.
I think everything else is a story, but pain is not a story. Pain is a reality. And that's what it, kind of brings this around to in this conversation, is fear as a story, as opposed to fear as a reality. No, it's a story. Pain is a reality.
Well, I would also add something to that. Fear is a reality. When I broke my ankle I think it was late 2018. There was a lot of pain. I broke it in 3 places and had to have surgeries. It was quite a misery.
It hurt.
It hurt, yes. I would say, though, we can also, the more that we can accept pain, just we say, and not resist it. Because I know that one of the things that it just came to me, probably because I have meditated and, done some mind work prior to that, I would relax into it rather than resist it. So even when the doctors came in and they were pulling my ankle to get things lined back up right in the middle, I mean, the whole thing was broken, but they were trying to get the bones kind of lined back up. Incredible amount of pain. But rather than resist it, which would have made it more painful and also less likely to be adjusted correctly, I relaxed into it as much as I could. And I think that's the thing too. If the more we can just let it be, the pain is there, let the pain be. Not resist it and not have the story that it shouldn't be or all. And I had plenty of other stories about things, but in that moment I was aware enough to relax into the pain. I dealt with a lot of stories after that about why did this happen and so forth and so on. But even with pain, that's something that's real, just like COVID is real. It's like, what else are we adding to it? What story are we adding to it that's making it worse? And that's a way that we can,
No,
really
that's
work
really
through
well
it.
said. That's really well said, and it brings up all of these various elements. So fear, resistance, allowing, story, all of those things are all kind of now inside of I can begin to connect the dots on all of that. And I can begin to see that transitions have something to do with the unstorifying the fear.
I like that. Yes.
And
I love it.
And the dropping the resistance to the story, such that you can allow yourself to just really, what we want to do is flow through the transition into the next state of where now we're here and we're back on time and things are working well. I mean, I think you put a lot into that, and I'm saying to the degree that we can drop the story of fear and the resistance to whatever it is, because fear has a purpose. The purpose of fear is to protect you from doing stupid stuff. It's like, okay, got it. So if we were using fear, if we were using properly fear, it's like, okay, I got it. I got the message. Don't do stupid stuff. Don't step on that crack that broke my ankle, or drive through a red light or something. Don't do that. And so fear actually is a professional thing. It deals with a consequence. And so dealing effectively with the consequence by regarding the fear and doing whatever that is. But in the meantime, not at the level of this huge story about the fear, but just, okay, that's what it indicates is now that there's some kind of danger. And allowing myself to, in that case, flow, maybe, given that life is about transition, has something to do with a key to living life elegantly, and elegance is artful.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful. And I know that, one access to it, which is really in what you said, is being ever present to the stories that are just constantly showing up.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember speaking with you maybe a month ago about was this idea of allowing, and how that kind of it occurred to me at the time when I shared that with you, that it gave you access to some kind of freedom.
Yes, yes.
And so allowing in the face of the fear gives access to freedom.
Yeah, and I think it just implied within that, if you're allowing, you're just seeing it for as it is. You're not adding the story. Because
You're not making a story out of it.
when you
That's right.
add the story, most of the time our stories are going to be negative. Otherwise, they wouldn't be
Yeah.
holding us back. I mean, if you
Yeah.
come up with a positive story, go for it. But
There was a time back in, I don't know, maybe in the 80s, and one of the people that I considered a leader said something about, he was talking to a group of many, many people, and he said, "You probably wonder what people think about you." He said, "I'm going to tell you what they think about you." He said, "They think bad things."
I love that. It's like, that's
It was
great.
so freeing, because it was like, okay, now, well, I guess I don't need to worry about what you're thinking about me, because it's generally bad things, and
That
it's
is
clearly
great.
the story.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I think that's a good note to kind of wrap up here, John. It's yeah, I love that. It's like if we just we just like let those things be, that's really going to be our access to start moving through life more artfully and gracefully, even when these transitions that have this sort of cast of negativity, and bring the fear, relax into it, allow it, and that's the start of a new way of being.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you very much for the conversation, Melody.
Yes, thank you so much.
What I like about it is we kind of started in the middle, and we just kind of wandered around in it. And yet, when we come out at the end of the conversation, I'm actually, in a way, smarter than I was when I started the conversation.
And freer. For me, it's like I'm freer.
Yeah,
so.
freed up. Yeah, exactly.
Freed up. All right, John, thank you so much, and I'll look forward to talking with you again soon here
Okay,
on our
you
next
take care.
episode.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.